The first thing I noticed was the sound. A slow, steady dripping somewhere just beyond where I was lying. Not like rain. Heavier. Thicker. Each drop hitting the floor with a wet slap that made the silence around it feel even bigger. When I opened my eyes, the light hit me all wrong. A thin stripe of sunlight was cutting across the ceiling above, slicing through the dusty air like it didn't belong here. My head felt like someone had been inside with a hammer, pounding away for hours. My mouth was dry enough to hurt, and my neck ached so badly it felt twisted halfway around. I wasn't in a bed. I was sprawled on a cold tile floor, cheek pressed against grit and something sticky. My fingers brushed it and came back with a dark reddish smear that had dried to a crust. I sat up slowly, trying not to throw up, and saw I was in what looked like a small-town clinic. The kind with a single reception desk and a couple of waiting chairs. The place looked like a hurricane had been through it. One chair lay tipped on its side by the door. The counter was smeared with what had to be blood. Faint handprints dragged down as if the person had been pulled away mid-scream. The cabinets behind the desk hung open. Their contents: gauze, pill bottles, rolls of tape, spilled across the floor. A clipboard lay in the middle of it all. A page half filled with patient notes before the pen had scratched off the paper entirely. I rubbed my arms, trying to get the stiffness out of them. Felt like I'd been here for hours or days. My legs were no better, trembling under my weight when I tried to stand. My shirt was dusty, torn at the shoulder, and there was blood streaked along my forearm. It wasn't fresh, and when I ran my hands over myself, I couldn't find any wounds. Hello? My voice came out rough and low, like it had been weeks since I'd used it. Nothing answered. No voices. No footsteps. Just that slow, steady dripping. And somewhere beyond it, the faint sound of something metallic rattling in the breeze. The blinds were half drawn, but enough sunlight leaked through that I could see the room clearly. Dust floated in the air, twisting in the light. I pushed myself toward the nearest window, the muscles in my thighs burning with the effort. Outside, the summer sun was beating down on a town that looked wrong. Too still, too empty. From here, I could see the water, the shimmer of the coast, maybe a mile out, but the streets between here and there were silent. A bicycle lay in the middle of the road, its front wheels spinning lazily as if whoever had been riding it had just vanished. A car sat at an angle across the street, both front doors wide open. The inside stripped apart like someone had been searching for something and didn't care how much damage they caused. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to push the dizziness out of my head. But when I tried to think, really think about how I'd ended up here, nothing came. No memory of walking into this building. No memory of what I'd been doing before. No memory of anything. I reached for my name first. Should have been easy. The first thing you learn about yourself in life. But when I tried to grab hold of it, it slipped through my fingers like smoke. I searched for faces, people I knew, places I'd been, and found nothing but the sound of my own breathing. The only thought that stuck cold and hollow in my head was, "You're alone." Something inside me twisted hard at that. I gripped the windowsill until my knuckles went white, staring at the stillness outside. Then came the noise, a sharp crack from somewhere in the back of the clinic. The brittle, unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Every muscle in my body locked up. My head turned toward the hallway, eyes straining to see into the shadowy doorway. I held my breath without even realizing it. For a moment, nothing followed. Then, faintly, I thought I heard the scrape of something shifting across the floor. I forced myself to take a step toward it. My shoes made the faintest squeak against the tile, and I froze again, listening. The scrape had stopped. My heartbeat was loud in my ears when I noticed the radio. It was mounted high on the wall above the reception desk. The kind of thing you'd expect to play soft background music or call patients to their rooms. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dusty. The dial crooked. But now it was alive with static. A low hiss that grew sharper until it cut into a voice. The sound made me jump. A burst of words too loud in the dead air of the clinic. The voice wasn't human. Not exactly. It had that cold, flat tone of something automated. Reading from a script. Emergency alert. A viral outbreak has been confirmed in your area. I took a step back without meaning to. My eyes locked on the box. Infected individuals exhibit extreme aggression and cannibalistic behavior. Do not approach anyone showing signs of blood contamination. Shelter in place. Repeat. The voice cut out in a hiss of static. The words chopped in half before they could finish. The silence that followed was worse than the message. I stood there for a long second, staring at the radio as if it might come back on and tell me it was all a mistake. My hands were sweating, my chest tight. My thoughts felt jagged and fast, tumbling over each other in panic. The drip in the back room started again, louder now in the quiet, and with it came the slow, deliberate sound of something moving. The sound was faint, but it was there. A slow dragging shuffle followed by another drop of liquid hitting tile. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. My mind was telling me to stay put, to keep quiet, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But there was another part of me, the restless part that needed to know, that pushed my feet forward. Step by step, I crossed the reception area. My hands brushed against the edge of the desk as I passed. The wood worn smooth under my fingertips. The hallway to the back was narrow and dim, lined with closed doors and peeling paint. The smell changed here. Less of the sharp antiseptic. More of something sour and metallic. The shuffling stopped. I froze. One hand pressed against the wall. The silence felt heavier here, like the air itself was waiting. Then something clinked, like glass tapping against metal. I leaned my head toward the nearest doorway. Its frame cracked and splintered. The door hung half open, and beyond it was shadow. I could see shapes, cabinets, an examination table, but no movement. Still, I stepped inside. The room looked like it had been abandoned in a rush. Papers were scattered across the floor. Some of them stuck to dark stains I didn't want to identify. A metal tray lay upside down in the corner, a single scalpel glinting beneath it. The source of the dripping was in the far corner, and 4 bags split open, its contents seeping onto the floor and pooling near a tipped-over chair. I let out a slow breath, thinking maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the sound I'd heard was just this, a broken bag, a mess someone hadn't cleaned. Then I saw the footprints. They were faint, but the dried streaks of blood across the floor had been disturbed, smeared in long, uneven shapes leading to the far wall. My eyes followed them to a supply closet. The door wasn't closed, just cracked open enough for darkness to spill through. The smell was stronger here. I took a step toward it. and the door moved just a fraction of an inch, but enough to make my skin prickle. Hello. My voice was barely more than a whisper. Something inside the closet exhaled. It wasn't a normal breath. It was ragged, wet, like the air was fighting through something thick in the throat. I stepped back before I realized I'd moved. My heel caught on something and sent it clattering. A metal basin. The sound like a gunshot in the tight room. The closet door slammed open. What came out didn't move like a person should. It lurched. One arm bent at an unnatural angle. Head tilted too far to the side. The skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. The mouth hung open, lips split and bleeding, teeth stained dark. The eyes were wrong. Not cloudy like I'd seen in sick people before, but sharp pinpoint pupils locked straight on me. The thing let out a sound. Not a scream. Not exactly a growl. And charged. I stumbled backward, my hips slamming into the examination table. The creature's fingers, too long and knuckled, swiped the air where my face had been a second earlier. I grabbed the scalpel from the floor without thinking and slashed. The blade barely nicked its arm, but the reaction was immediate. It shrieked, a high, piercing sound, and lashed out again. I ran. The hallway was too narrow, my shoulder scraping the wall as I sprinted toward the front of the clinic. Behind me, the footsteps were wrong, too fast, too heavy, each one hitting like a hammer. I reached the reception desk and vaulted over it, landing hard on my knees. My eyes darted to the windows. The glass was thin, single-paned. If I hit it hard enough. A loud thud echoed behind me. The thing had slammed into the desk, rattling the entire frame. My breath came in gasps as I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the front window. The first hit cracked it, but didn't break through. The second shattered it completely. A rain of sharp shards scattering across the floor. I climbed through, cutting my hand on the way down. The summer heat hit me like a wave, the sun glaring in my eyes as I stumbled into the street. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. Then the sound came again. Not the heavy footsteps this time, but a scraping, dragging noise as the creature climbed through the broken frame. I ran. The coastal air smelled of salt and rot. My feet pounded against the cracked asphalt, past the bicycle lying on its side, past the abandoned car with its doors flung open. I didn't look back. Couldn't. Every street I turned down looked the same. Storefronts with shattered windows. Cars stopped mid-intersection. The occasional smear of blood on a wall or door. I didn't see another living person. Just the evidence of people and the absence where they should have been. My chest was on fire by the time I ducked into a narrow alley between two buildings. I pressed my back to the wall, the brick warm from the sun. My ears strained for the sound of pursuit, but all I could hear was the rush of my own blood. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where I was. But I knew one thing. That alert hadn't been lying. Something had happened here. Something that turned people into whatever I'd just seen. And if I stayed alone, I was going to die. I had to find someone. Anyone. I was halfway down the alley when I heard voices. Faint at first, like they were coming from around a corner. But getting closer, I froze. Torn between relief and caution. Then I saw them. 3 people stepped into view from the far end of the street. A tall man in a faded green jacket holding what looked like a broken pipe. A woman in a sleeveless shirt, her dark hair tied back, scanning every window they passed. And another man, older, limping slightly, carrying a duffel bag that looked heavy enough to tear at the seams. I stepped out, raising my hands. "Hey, over here." The reaction was immediate. The tall man swung the pipe up like a weapon. The woman grabbed the older man's arm, pulling him back. Their eyes were wide, darting between me and the street behind me. I'm not infected," I called, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. They didn't lower their guard. Not yet. The three of them didn't move at first. The tall man's grip on the pipe tightened, his knuckles going pale. The woman's eyes never left me, and the older man shifted his weight like he was ready to bolt if I took a step closer. I said, "I'm not infected," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just woke up in that clinic back there. I don't know what's happening." "But you came from the clinic," the tall man interrupted, his voice sharp. I hesitated. "Yes." He took a step forward, pipe still raised. "Then you might have been bitten." "I wasn't," I said quickly. I held up my arms, turning them so they could see. "No bites. No scratches. Nothing like that. Just this." I gestured to the dried blood on my forearm. "It's not mine." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Whose is it?" I opened my mouth, but the truth caught in my throat. I don't know." That seemed to make them even more tense. The tall man shifted his stance, his pipe angled slightly higher. "Ben," the woman said quietly. The tall man glanced at her, and I caught his name. "Ben." She stepped forward just enough to be between us, though she didn't lower her guard. "Look," she said. "You're asking us to believe you're clean when we just watched someone's neighbor tear their best friend's throat out 2 streets over. Forgive us if we're careful." "A mark," I said before I even realized I'd said it. The name came out of nowhere like it had been sitting in the back of my mind, waiting for me to reach for it. My chest tightened. I finally had something about myself. "Mark Reynolds. I'm not lying to you, I swear." The older man, still clutching his duffel bag, spoke up for the first time. His voice was softer, but there was a tired weight to it. If he was infected, he'd be on us already. Or worse. Ben didn't look convinced, but he didn't swing either. "Fine," he said after a moment. "You stay in front. And the first time you act wrong, I don't hesitate." "That's fair," I said, even though the threat made my stomach turn. We moved together, me leading as they followed a few paces behind. The streets here were narrower, lined with small shops and faded awnings flapping in the breeze. I glanced into the windows as we passed. Some were smashed, shelves inside stripped bare. Others were intact, but the interiors were dark, shadows stretching long across the floors. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice low. "A week," the woman answered from behind me. "Maybe more. Time's gotten strange. Where's everyone? Dead or hiding?" she said flatly. We rounded a corner and came to a small intersection. The smell hit me before I saw the source. Thick, heavy, like meat left out in the sun. Then I spotted it. A man lay sprawled across the hood of a car, his chest torn open, ribs cracked and bent. Flies buzzed in a black cloud over him. His face was frozen in a scream. I forced myself to look away, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. You get used to it, Ben muttered. I don't want to, I said without thinking. The woman glanced at me. You won't have a choice. We didn't stop moving until we reached a narrow back street where the buildings leaned over us, casting shade that was almost cool compared to the heat outside. They led me to a door wedged between two boarded-up shops. Ben knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. A voice from inside said, "Clear, clear." Ben replied. The door opened just enough for us to slip inside. It was a small space. Maybe it had been a storage room once, but they'd made it into something like a base. A few cots were set up along one wall. A table in the middle with cans of food stacked neatly beside it. A lantern sat in the center, casting a dim glow over the room. Another person was inside, a woman with close-cropped hair, wearing a faded nurse's uniform. She stood when she saw me, eyes immediately scanning me up and down. "This is Mark," Ben said. "We picked him up near the clinic." The nurse frowned. "Was he bitten?" "No," I said quickly, raising my arms again. She stepped closer, looking at the dried blood on my arm. "This isn't yours." "No." She nodded, though her eyes lingered on it for a second longer before she stepped back. "Rosa." She introduced herself. "Elena," the dark-haired woman said from behind me, and I caught her name, too. I nodded to both of them, though my focus was already shifting. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. But it was the warmth that got me. For the first time since waking up, I didn't feel the heat of the sun or the sharp bite of the coastal wind. "We can't stay here long," Ben said, setting his pipe down beside the table. "Supplies are running low, and the alerts have been getting worse." "What alerts?" I asked. Rosa motioned to an old portable radio sitting on a shelf. "They've been broadcasting updates since it started. Usually warnings about infected moving into new areas. But lately it's been bad. Whole towns going dark in hours. Like ours." Elena added that made my stomach tighten. "Where were you all headed before this?" Ben leaned on the table. "There's talk of a safe zone inland. Guarded, fenced, food, and water. No one's sure if it's real, but it's the only plan worth following. And you're going." "We were until we got cut off." Ben glanced at the door. "Too many of them on the streets. But we can't wait much longer." The way he said it made it clear too many didn't mean 10 or 20. Before I could ask more, the sound of something hitting the outer wall made us all freeze. It was soft at first, a slow scrape, like someone dragging their hand across the brick. Then it came again, harder, with a dull thud. Ben grabbed his pipe. Elena moved to the door, listening. Rosa motioned for me to stay quiet. The scrape turned into a rapid pounding, and then came the sound I'd heard back in the clinic. That wet, ragged breathing. The pounding grew louder, faster, like whoever or whatever was outside had lost all patience. The doorframe rattled with each blow. Ben planted himself between the table and the entrance, pipe raised and ready. Elena shifted to one side of the doorway, her back pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the handle as if sheer focus could keep it from turning. Rosa moved toward the CS, grabbing a heavy first aid kit and tucking it under one arm. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The wet breathing outside didn't stop. It thickened like the thing was leaning closer to the wood. trying to smell us through it. Mark, Ben said without looking at me. If that door gives, you run for the back. Don't wait for anyone. What about you? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Don't worry about us, Elenina said sharply. Just don't freeze. A low, guttural growl bled through the wood. My chest tightened. That sound was too human to belong to an animal, but too warped to be anything else. The pounding stopped suddenly, leaving only the sound of our breathing and the faint hum of the lantern. We all stayed frozen, waiting. Then came the crash. The door didn't break all the way in. It splintered near the top hinge, sending a jagged shard of wood flying across the room. Through the gap, a hand shot in, pale and streaked with something dark, fingers clawing at the air. The nails were cracked and filthy, each one catching the light as it scraped the inside of the doorframe. Ben swung the pipe hard. The sound of metal hitting bone was sharp and final. The hand dropped, but the growl outside became a screech that clawed at my eardrums. They know we're here now, Rosa said, already moving to the back of the room. Back exit, Ben ordered. Now. Elena swung the duffel bag onto her shoulder, and I followed Rosa to a narrow hallway I hadn't noticed before. The air here was cooler, but it carried the faint smell of salt water and decay. The corridor ended at a single metal door with a bar across it. Rosa pushed it open, and sunlight spilled in, blinding after the dim lantern light. The alley outside was narrower than I'd hoped. Shadows pulled along the edges, and every sound seemed to echo too loud. The clatter of our boots on the pavement, the muffled slam of the front door being hit again. Where? I asked, my voice tight. North, Ben said, taking the lead. Out of the coastal streets. More open ground means fewer places for them to pin us. We moved fast, but every corner was a gamble. Some streets were empty, sun-baked, and silent, except for the buzz of flies. Others weren't. Halfway down one block, we spotted two of them hunched over something on the pavement. Their backs were hunched, muscles twitching under their skin. The sound they made was wet, rhythmic, and wrong. Ben held up a hand, signaling us to stop. The creatures didn't look up, too focused on their meal. I made the mistake of glancing down at it. It had been a person. All that was left now was a shredded torso and one limp arm. Fingers curled as if still reaching for help. I tore my eyes away, swallowing hard. Quiet, Elena mouthed. We skirted around them, keeping close to the buildings. The smell was unbearable, sweet and foul all at once, and it clung to the back of my throat even after we'd moved on. By the time we reached a wider street, the sun was sinking just enough to throw long shadows between the buildings. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, and every muscle in my legs burned. How far to open ground? I asked. Not far, Ben said. 2, maybe 3 more blocks. We were halfway through the next intersection when a sound cut through the air. A sharp metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. We all turned toward it at once. It came from a side street, and before I could process what I was seeing, a figure stumbled into view. A man, maybe mid-40s, limping badly, his right leg bending wrong at the knee. His face was pale and slick with sweat, and his eyes darted wildly as he saw us. Help, he called, his voice cracking. Please. Ben froze. Elena's eyes flicked between the man and the street behind him. From that street came the sound of many feet hitting pavement at once. They were coming. Shit, Ben muttered. The man stumbled toward us, both arms outstretched. Please, there. He didn't finish. Something hit him from behind, hard enough to send him sprawling face first onto the asphalt. The infected that landed on him didn't waste a second. It went for his neck, tearing in with a sound I'll never forget. The others followed, pouring out of the side street in a tide of pale skin and snapping jaws. Run, Ben barked. We bolted, the sound of pursuit exploding behind us. My lungs burned instantly, every breath sharp and shallow. I risked one glance over my shoulder. Bad idea. They were fast. Faster than they had any right to be. Rosa was just ahead of me, clutching the first aid kit to her chest. Elena was behind me, her eyes locked on the nearest alley. Ben sharply toward it veered, and we followed without thinking. The alley was tight and full of debris. Overturned trash cans, a shattered wooden pallet. But it funneled us away from the street, away from the main mass of them. We didn't stop running until we burst out onto a grassy slope leading up, toward what looked like an old-school building. The chain-link fence around it had been cut open in one place, the edges bent outward. Ben didn't hesitate. He shoved through the gap, motioning for us to follow. Inside, the school grounds were eerily empty. A few abandoned backpacks lay scattered near the entrance, zippers half open, books spilling out like whoever owned them had been too scared to care. This way, Ben said, heading for the side entrance. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cooler, but it smelled faintly of mildew and dust. We passed through a darkened hallway lined with lockers, our footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Finally, Ben stopped in a classroom near the back. It was large enough for all of us with windows we could block and only one entrance to defend. We rest here, he said, locking the door, and we figure out our next move. I sank into one of the desks, my chest still heaving. My mind replayed the last 10 minutes in flashes. The hand through the door, the shredded body in the street, the man being pulled down before he could reach us. We were alive for now, but I couldn't shake the thought. If this was what one day looked like, I didn't know how many more I could survive. The classroom felt too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was gone. No power here, leaving only the faint sound of our breathing and the occasional creak of the building settling. Dust floated in the shafts of sunlight that slipped through the windows, each mote moving in slow, lazy spirals, like the world outside hadn't completely collapsed. Ben was pacing near the door, pipe in hand. Elena was by the windows, peeking between the blinds every few minutes, scanning the grounds. Rosa sat at a desk with the first aid kit open, restocking gauze and alcohol swabs, her movements quick and practiced. I stayed in the back trying to make my breathing sound normal. My heart still hadn't slowed all the way down. Every time I blinked, I saw the man in the street again, his outstretched hands, the panic in his eyes before the swarm hit him. I needed to think about something else, anything else. I stared at the chalkboard, half covered in dusty equations from a lesson no one would ever finish. My eyes drifted to a crumpled flyer taped to the wall. A school carnival announcement. There was a picture of a child with a balloon, face painted like a tiger, grinning at the camera. The image hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, and I leaned forward in my seat without realizing it. Somewhere deep in my mind, a laugh echoed, high and bright, a girl's voice. Lily. The name surfaced like it had been trapped under ice, rising fast and shattering through. I gripped the edge of the desk. A flash. Bright colors. The smell of frosting. Someone singing off-key. A birthday cake with 7 candles. A small face leaning toward it. Cheeks puffed to blow them out. And beside her, a woman's hand on her shoulder. Sarah. The names anchored themselves in my head like they'd always been there. My daughter. My wife. The warmth of the memory lasted only seconds before it twisted. The bright colors faded. The singing stopped. The room was dark now. The air heavy with silence. The only sound was pounding. Not singing. Not clapping. But fists hitting a door. Sarah's voice low and urgent. Mark. Go. Take her. Go. Then a scream. Mark. The sound of my own name snapped me out of it. Elena was watching me from across the room. One eyebrow raised. You okay? She asked. I nodded too quickly. Yeah. Just tired. She studied me for another second, but didn't push. Get some rest if you can. Ben says we move again at first light. Where to? I asked. Same place we've been trying to get to. The safe zone inland. Rumor is it's got walls, guards, food, and no infected. She gave a humorless smile. But I'll believe it when I see it. Rosa spoke up without looking away from her kit. If it's real, we'll be lucky to make it before we run dry. We've got maybe 2 days of food left if we stretch it. We'll find more. Ben said from the door, his voice firm in a way that didn't allow disagreement. We have to. We ate what passed for dinner not long after. A few protein bars split 4 ways and a couple sips of warm bottled water each. It wasn't enough to fill the gnawing in my stomach. But I didn't complain. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the room in orange light, we'd blocked the windows with overturned desks and stacked a few more against the door. Ben took the first watch. The rest of us stretched out where we could. Elena on the floor near the window. Rosa curled up on a cot she dragged in from the nurse's office. I stayed where I was in the back corner. My pipe substitute, a heavy piece of chair leg I'd broken off. Resting beside me. Sleep came slow. Every sound outside made my eyes snap open. Once I thought I heard footsteps in the hall. Soft and deliberate. But they faded before I could tell if they were real. When sleep finally took me, it wasn't the kind that rested you. I was back in our house. The lights were off, but the glow of the TV flickered across the living room. Lily was on the couch clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. Sarah was in front of the window, peeking through the blinds. They're here, she whispered, her voice trembling. The pounding started again. Not at the door this time, but at the back of the house. The kitchen. Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide. Mark, you have to. A crash. Shattering glass. I reached for Lily, but before I could grab her, something lunged through the kitchen doorway. The skin was gray, mouth already smeared with blood. Eyes locked on us. It moved too fast. Sarah shoved me hard, the force sending me stumbling backward. I fell through the window. Glass cut into my arms and shoulders as I hit the ground outside. My ears were ringing. I turned in time to see Sarah grab the kitchen knife from the counter and stepped between the thing and Lily. The last thing I saw before I woke was her scream as it hit her. I sat bolt upright in the classroom, my skin clammy with sweat. The desks blocking the windows loomed like dark shapes in the dim light. "You were dreaming," Elena's voice said quietly from near the window. I turned toward her. She was sitting up now, the faintest light from outside brushing the edge of her face. "Sounded bad," she added. "Yeah," I said, my voice raw. "It was." She didn't ask more. I was grateful for that. Ben stirred from his spot near the door, glancing between us. "Get some more rest if you can. We head out in a couple hours." I tried, but the images wouldn't leave me. Sarah's face, Lily's small hands clutching that rabbit, the thing that broke through the kitchen door. The memory was clear now. I knew what had happened to them, and I knew why I couldn't stop shaking. The hours before dawn passed slowly, each minute stretched out by the steady tick of my heartbeat and the weight of my thoughts. When the first hint of light filtered through the cracks in the window barricade, Ben was already up, packing what little food we had left into the duffel bag. "Time to move," he said, his voice low but firm. Rosa checked her supplies one last time, tucking the first aid kit into the bag beside the food. Elena adjusted the strap on her rifle, an old hunting gun she'd found before we met, and gave the room one last sweep with her eyes. We left the classroom in silence, stepping back into the stale air of the hallway. The building creaked around us as we made our way toward the rear exit, our footsteps muffled against the worn linoleum. Outside, the air was already warm, the promise of another hot day pressing down on us. The schoolyard was still, the grass damp with early morning dew. We moved through the gap in the fence, keeping low and close together. The streets beyond were quieter than yesterday. No movement, no distant screams, no pounding footsteps, but that only made me more uneasy. In this new world, silence was never a gift. It was a warning. The safe zone, if it was real, lay several miles inland. Ben had mapped out the route on the back of an old receipt the night before. Took us through a stretch of open ground. Less cover, but fewer corners for the infected to burst from. And then into a wooded area that would hide our approach. We made good time at first. The heat built as the sun climbed higher, baking the cracked asphalt beneath our feet. Every so often we passed the husk of a car left abandoned mid-street, doors hanging open like a wound. Sometimes there was blood, sometimes worse. An hour in, we reached the open stretch. It was a wide boulevard lined with storefronts on either side, glass shattered and signs hanging crooked. We stayed close to the middle where we could see in every direction. Halfway down, Rosa stopped. She was staring into one of the shops, a small diner with its front window blown out. Inside, a body was slumped in a booth, its head resting on folded arms like it had fallen asleep. "Don't," Ben warned. "I'm not," she started, but the body moved. It lifted its head slowly, too slowly, revealing a face half torn away, teeth bared in a permanent snarl. Then it stood. The sound it made was enough to freeze me in place. A high keening wail that carried down the boulevard like a flare gun. We ran from the side streets. They came. Not just one or two. Dozens. Pale faces. Eyes locked on us. Mouths opening in unison like they could already taste us. Elena fired once. the gunshot cracking through the morning air. But it barely slowed them. Ben led us toward a narrow alley between two collapsed buildings, shouting for us to move faster. Rosa tripped halfway there. I spun back, grabbing her under the arm and hauling her upright. She was limping, but we didn't have time to check why. The alley twisted and turned, littered with broken glass and debris. Behind us, the pounding of feet was deafening, the snarls closer with each second. We burst out into the treant, branches clawing at our clothes as we pushed deeper into the woods. The change in terrain slowed them, but not enough. Ben skidded to a stop ahead of us. "Go," he shouted, swinging his pipe hard into the first one that caught up. It dropped, but two more took its place. "Ben." Elena's voice cracked. "Go." He roared again, shoving one back with all his weight. We ran because we had no other choice. By the time we reached a small clearing, the sounds of the fight were gone. So was Ben. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Rosa's limp had gotten worse. She was pale, sweating. When she stumbled against a tree, I saw why. Her pant leg was torn and the skin beneath was already discolored. She saw me looking and shook her head. "Don't stop. You have to make it. We can carry you," I said. But she was already unzipping the first aid kit, pulling out a small bottle of painkillers. "I'll slow you down. You know what happens if I keep going like this." Her voice was calm in a way that made my throat ache. Elena opened her mouth to argue, but Rosa was already stepping back toward the shadows at the edge of the clearing. "Go," she said simply. We went. The woods thinned as we pressed on, the sound of our breathing loud in the quiet. My legs felt like lead, every step heavier than the last. But I kept moving. Every time I faltered, I saw Lily's face in my mind, the way she'd smiled at her cake, the way she'd clung to Sarah's side, and it pushed me forward. By the time we saw the fence, my body was on autopilot. It was tall, topped with razor wire, stretching in both directions as far as I could see. On the other side, rows of sandbags and the glint of sunlight off metal. Rifles, maybe. Two figures stood near a gate, their uniforms dusty but intact. They watched us approach, weapons in hand but not raised. Elena slowed first, her shoulders sagging. I stopped beside her, staring at the gate. We could go forward. We could knock, ask for entry, hope that whatever was inside was better than what we'd left behind. But part of me hesitated. I'd seen what people did when they were afraid. I'd seen them shoot strangers without asking questions, leave others behind without looking back. A wall didn't guarantee safety. Elena must have been thinking the same thing because she looked at me and said, "We don't have to go in." I thought of Sarah's voice telling me to run, of Lily's small hands clutching that rabbit. I thought of Ben standing his ground, of Rosa stepping back into the trees. "No," I said slowly, "we don't. But we can't stay out here either." The guards at the gate were still watching, waiting for us to decide. I took a deep breath. "We go together," I said finally. "Whatever's in there, we face it as a team." Elena's mouth quirked into the smallest smile. "Together." Then, we walked toward the gate, the sound of our footsteps blending with the distant crash of waves. The guards stepped forward, one of them raising a hand and greeting or warning. Couldn't tell which, but for the first time since I'd woken up in that clinic, I felt like I was walking toward something, not just running away. Whatever was on the other side, at least we'd face it side by side. And in this world, that was the closest thing to hope left.